The Vorthani Empire had ruled the stars for over 10,000 years. They had crushed 17 civilizations under their claws and turned entire planets into factories and farms for their growing population. Their warships were legendary and their armies were endless. When the Vorthani decided to take something, they took it, and nobody in the known galaxy had ever stopped them. High Sovereign. Zelthor the Unyielding sat upon his throne made of bones from conquered species. He was ancient even by Vorthani standards. His green scales faded to a dull gray, but his eyes still burned with the hunger for power. He had spent his entire life expanding the empire, and now he had found a new target. A small blue planet orbiting an average yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. The natives called it Earth. The Vorthani scouts had watched humanity for several years. They saw a species divided into countless nations, constantly fighting among themselves over resources and ideas. They saw primitive technology compared to Vorthani standards. They saw soft bodies, without scales or claws or natural armor. In every way that mattered, humans seemed like easy prey. Zelthor had summoned representatives from Earth to his flagship, a vessel so massive it could be seen from planetary surfaces when it passed overhead. The ship was called the Eternal Dominion, and it had witnessed the surrender of 6 different species in its long history. Today, Zelthor planned to add a 7th. The human delegation arrived in a small shuttle. It looked like a toy next to the Vorthani warship. Only one human stepped out when the airlock opened. He was a man of average height, with graying hair and a face that showed more tiredness than fear. He wore a simple dark suit and carried a leather briefcase in his left hand. His name was John Carter, and he had been a diplomat for 30 years. John walked through corridors lined with Vorthani soldiers. Each one stood over 7 feet tall with thick scales and muscles that could crush stone. They held weapons that hummed with energy and stared at the small human with obvious contempt. John did not seem to notice them. He walked at a casual pace, looking around at the architecture like a tourist visiting a museum. The throne room was designed to intimidate. It stretched upward for hundreds of feet, with banners hanging from the ceiling showing the symbols of every conquered world. Alien dignitaries from across the empire filled the viewing galleries, eager to witness another species brought to its knees. At the far end of the room, High Sovereign Zelthor waited on his throne of bones, surrounded by his most trusted advisors and generals. John Carter walked the entire length of the room alone. His footsteps echoed in the massive space. When he reached the base of the throne platform, he stopped and looked up at the alien emperor. With an expression that could only be described as mild curiosity, Zelthor rose to his full height. He was nearly 8 feet tall, and his ceremonial armor made him look even larger. His voice boomed through the chamber, amplified by hidden speakers and translated into human language by advanced technology. "Human," Zelthor began, letting the word drip with disdain. "You stand before the ruler of 17 star systems. You stand in the presence of the mightiest empire this galaxy has ever known. Your world has been chosen to join our dominion, and you will now hear our terms." John shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He glanced at his watch briefly, then returned his attention to the emperor. Zelthor continued, his voice growing louder with each word. "The Vorthani Empire hereby proclaims total war upon the human species. Your pathetic nations will be dissolved. Your governments will be replaced with our appointed rulers. Your people will serve the empire as workers and soldiers. Those who resist will be destroyed without mercy. Those who submit may be allowed to live as servants." He paused for dramatic effect. The alien dignitaries in the galleries leaned forward, waiting for the human to collapse in terror or beg for different terms. This was always the best part of any conquest. Watching the hope drain from a species as they realized what was coming, John Carter scratched his chin thoughtfully. Then he walked over to a small bench near the wall, sat down, and opened his briefcase. He pulled out a folded newspaper and began reading. The silence in the throne room was absolute. Zelthor blinked his large yellow eyes several times, unsure if he was seeing correctly. His advisors exchanged confused glances. The dignitaries in the galleries began whispering among themselves. "Human," Zelthor growled, his claws gripping the arms of his throne. "Did you hear what I said?" I have declared war upon your entire species. Your civilization faces total annihilation. John looked up from his newspaper with a polite smile. Yes, I heard you. War, destruction, serving the Empire, all very dramatic. Give me just a moment. I want to finish this article about a local bakery competition back home. Apparently, someone made a cake shaped like a famous landmark. Quite impressive, actually. He returned to reading. Admiral Crix, commander of the Imperial Fleet, stepped forward with his hand on his weapon. You dare show such disrespect to the High Sovereign? I should cut you down where you sit. John turned a page of his newspaper calmly. You could try, but then you would not have anyone to formally receive your declaration of war. And I imagine there is some important paperwork involved. You seem like the type of empire that cares about proper procedures. Zelthor slammed his fist against his throne, creating a sound like thunder. You are either the bravest creature I have ever encountered, or the most foolish. Do you not understand what our fleet will do to your world? We have burned planets to ash. We have made entire species extinct. What makes you think humanity will fare any differently? John finally set down his newspaper and folded it neatly. He looked directly at the Emperor with eyes that held no fear, no worry, and no particular concern. It was the look of a man who had been told it might rain later and was deciding whether to bring an umbrella. High Sovereign, John said slowly, humanity has a very old saying. Those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Before you bring your fleet to Earth, I strongly suggest you learn some of our history. You might find it very educational. He stood up, tucked the newspaper under his arm, and picked up his briefcase. Now I assume someone will escort me back to my shuttle. I have a long journey home, and I would like to finish the crossword puzzle before I arrive. 7 letters for persistent annoyance, by the way. I believe the answer might be Vorthani. He turned and walked toward the exit without waiting for permission. His footsteps echoed through the silent throne room as every alien present watched him. Leave with their mouths hanging open. Behind him, Zelthar roared with fury, and his claws left deep scratches in the ancient bones of his throne. But somewhere deep in his ancient heart, the High Sovereign felt a strange new sensation that he had not experienced in centuries. For the first time in his very long life, the ruler of 17 star systems felt the smallest seed of doubt beginning to grow. The human had not begged. The human had not trembled. The human had read a newspaper and made jokes about bakery competitions. Something was very wrong. And Zelthor could not understand what it was. 3 days had passed since the declaration of war, and the Vorsani High Command was in a state of complete confusion. Admiral Crix stood before a massive holographic display showing Earth and its surrounding space. His officers sat in rows behind him, their scales rippling with nervous energy as they reviewed the latest intelligence reports. There is no military mobilization, Crix announced, his voice filled with disbelief. The human fleet remains in standard patrol formations. Their ground forces have not moved to defensive positions. Their population centers show no signs of evacuation or panic. General Throck, commander of the ground invasion forces, leaned forward in his seat. That is impossible. We have announced total war. Every species in history has responded with immediate action. Either they prepare to fight, or they prepare to surrender. The humans are doing neither. Crix pulled up more data on the display. It gets stranger. We intercepted their news broadcasts. The declaration of war received approximately 4 minutes of coverage on their major networks. 4 minutes. Then they returned to discussing weather patterns and sporting events. The Vorthani officers exchanged worried glances. This was not how things were supposed to work. The Empire had a system, a method that had been refined over thousands of years. They would announce their intentions with maximum drama. Watch the target species collapse into chaos, and then move in to claim their prize. Humanity was not following the script. On Earth, life continued with remarkable normalcy. Ambassador John Carter had returned home and was immediately invited to appear on a popular morning talk show. The host, a cheerful woman named Lisa Monroe, greeted him with a warm smile and a cup of coffee. So, Lisa began, crossing her legs and leaning back in her chair. You just returned from meeting the leader of an alien empire that wants to destroy us all? How was your trip? John accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. Long. Their ships are very impressive, but not designed for human comfort. I had to sleep sitting up, which is not ideal for someone my age. And the whole war thing. The total annihilation of our species. John shrugged. They seem very enthusiastic about it. Lots of dramatic speeches and throne rooms decorated with bones. Very theatrical, actually. I would give them high marks for presentation. Lisa laughed, and the studio audience joined her. Were you scared at all? I mean, they reportedly have a fleet of 10,000 warships. I was a bit worried about missing my connecting flight home, John admitted. As for the war, well, I have been a diplomat for 30 years. I have seen countries threaten each other with nuclear weapons over fishing rights. An alien empire throwing a tantrum is just another Tuesday, really. The interview was broadcast across the globe, and clips of it spread rapidly through human communication networks. Within hours, people everywhere were making jokes about the Vorthani. Comedy shows created parodies of High Sovereign Zelthair. Social media filled with humorous images showing the alien emperor in ridiculous situations. Someone created a game where players could throw virtual pies at Vorthani warships, back on the Eternal Dominion. Vorthani intelligence officers worked around the clock trying to understand what was happening. Senior analyst Vex had spent 40 years studying conquered species, and she had never encountered anything like this. The humans are laughing at us, she reported to Admiral Crix. Not privately, not in secret, but openly and publicly. They are creating entertainment based on our declaration of war. They find us amusing. Crix stared at her as if she had spoken in an unknown language. Amusing? We threatened to burn their cities and enslave their children. How is that amusing? I do not know, Vex admitted. But there is more. We intercepted a formal response from something called the United Nations, which appears to be a gathering of their various tribal leaders. Would you like to hear it? Crix nodded and Vex read from her display. We acknowledge your declaration of war. Please schedule any invasion attempts at least 2 weeks in advance to allow for proper media coverage. We recommend avoiding major holiday periods as public attention will be focused elsewhere. Thank you for your interest in Earth. The bridge fell silent. Crix read the message again, then a third time, certain he must be misunderstanding something. They want us to schedule our invasion? He finally asked. For media coverage. It appears so, Admiral. Crix turned to face the viewing window, staring out at the stars. In all his years of service, he had conquered 3 worlds personally. He had watched species beg for mercy, had seen governments crumble at the mere sight of his fleet. Never once had anyone asked him to check their calendar first. High Sovereign Zelthor received the reports in his private chambers. Unlike the public throne room, this space was small and simple, designed for thinking rather than intimidating. The ancient emperor sat alone, reading the intelligence summaries over and over again. The humans were not afraid. Not only were they not afraid, they seemed genuinely unbothered by the prospect of total war. Their leader had not called emergency meetings. Their military had not changed its alert status. Their citizens had not stockpiled supplies or fled to shelters. Instead, they were making jokes. Zeltar had lived for over 300 years. He had personally overseen the conquest of 8 civilizations. He knew what fear looked like, how it smelled, how it changed the behavior of intelligent beings. The humans showed none of those signs. There were only 2 possible explanations. Either the humans were completely insane, lacking the basic survival instincts that all intelligent species possessed, or they knew something the Vorthane did not. They had some reason to be confident, some weapon or strategy that made them feel safe even against the mightiest empire in the galaxy. Zeltar thought about the human ambassador in his newspaper. He thought about the crossword puzzle comment, the joke about bakeries, the complete lack of respect for Vorthani power. That was not the behavior of a fool. That was the behavior of someone who held a winning hand and knew it. The Emperor reached for his communication device and connected to Admiral Crix. Before we proceed with the invasion, Zelthor said slowly, I want full analysis of human military capabilities. Not estimates, not projections, but confirmed data. I want to know exactly what weapons they have, where they are located, and what they can do. Right. It will take time, High Sovereign Crix replied. Their system is well protected. Then take the time. Something is wrong here, Admiral. Something we do not understand. And I did not conquer 17 star systems by rushing blindly into situations I did not understand. Zelthor ended the communication and sat in the darkness of his chambers. Outside his window, the stars burned cold and distant. Somewhere. Among those stars was a small blue planet full of soft creatures who had responded to the threat of total annihilation by laughing. The High Sovereign found that he could not stop thinking about that newspaper. Vorsani Armada entered the Sol system on a cold morning in January. 10,000 warships emerged from faster-than-light travel near the orbit of Neptune, their engines glowing like angry stars against the black emptiness of space. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in the history of the Empire, carrying enough soldiers to occupy a dozen worlds and enough weapons to crack planets like eggs. Admiral Crix stood on the bridge of his flagship, the crushing tide, watching the distant sun grow slowly brighter as the fleet advanced. His officers moved with practiced efficiency around him, managing the complex dance of 10,000 vessels traveling in perfect formation. All ships report ready for combat, his second-in-command announced. We will reach the third planet in 6 standard cycles. Crix nodded but said nothing. Despite his outward confidence, the reports from intelligence still bothered him. They had found very little useful information about human military capabilities. Earth seemed to have only a small fleet of ships, nothing compared to the Vorthani Armada. Their ground forces were divided among their many nations, poorly coordinated and equipped with primitive weapons. By all logical analysis, the invasion should be simple. So why did the humans remain so calm? The fleet passed Jupiter, the massive gas giant dwarfing even the largest Vorthani warships. As they approached the asteroid belt that separated the outer and inner planets, sensors detected something unusual. Admiral, a young officer, called out, "We are detecting a single vessel ahead. It appears to be human in origin." Crix walked to the sensor station and examined the readings himself. Indeed, there was one tiny ship floating alone in the vastness of space. It was unarmed, barely larger than a personal shuttle, and it was broadcasting a continuous signal. "What are they saying?" Crix demanded. "They are requesting communication, Admiral. They say they have a message from Earth High Command." Crix almost laughed. The humans had sent one unarmed ship to face 10,000 warships. It was either the bravest act he had ever witnessed or the most pathetic. He opened a communication channel. The face that appeared on his screen belonged to a human female, with short brown hair and calm gray eyes. She wore a simple uniform and spoke with a steady voice. "Attention, Vorsane, Fleet. This is Captain Amy Sullivan of the diplomatic vessel Patience. Before you proceed into the inner system, Earth's High Command has requested that we share some historical information with you. We believe it will help you make a more informed decision about your invasion plans." Crix sneered at the screen. "You think a history lesson will stop us? We have conquered 17 civilizations? Your primitive world will be the 18th. Captain Sullivan remained completely calm. "We understand your confidence, Admiral. Many have shared it over the centuries. We simply ask that you review the data we are about to transmit. Consider it a professional courtesy between military forces." Before Crix could respond, his communication officer spoke up. "Admiral, they are sending a large data package. Should I block it?" Crix waved his hand dismissively. "Let it through. I want to see what desperate propaganda they have prepared." The data package was enormous, containing thousands of files organized into categories. Crix ordered it displayed on the main view screen so all his bridge officers could witness what he assumed would be a pitiful attempt at intimidation. The first files were historical records of human conflicts. The display showed something called World War I, and the Vorthani officers watched in growing silence as the images played. They saw trenches stretching for hundreds of miles, filled with human soldiers living in mud and blood. They saw weapons that fired metal projectiles at incredible speeds, tearing through flesh and bone. They saw clouds of poison gas rolling across battlefields, killing everything they touched. They saw machines that crawled on treads, crushing everything in their path. They saw the faces of the dead, millions upon millions of them, humans, killed by other humans. "What is this?" General Throck asked quietly. "They did this to each other?" "Keep watching," Captain Sullivan said through the communication channel. The display moved to World War II, and the horrors multiplied. Cities reduced to rubble by endless bombing, ships sinking in frozen waters, carrying thousands to their deaths, camps where humans were systematically murdered by the millions. And at the end, a weapon that split atoms themselves, turning entire cities into fire and ash in the blink of an eye. The Vorthani officers stared in absolute silence. The data continued. Korea, Vietnam, countless smaller conflicts, each one demonstra. Ted knew in creative ways that humans had found to kill each other. Bombs that scattered smaller bombs across wide areas, chemicals that burned through skin and bone, weapons that could be launched from one continent to strike another within minutes. These casualty figures, senior analyst Vex said, her voice shaking slightly, millions dead in single conflicts, tens of millions. They lost more of their own kind in these wars than the total population of many species we have conquered. Admiral Crix said nothing. His claws gripped the edge of his command chair so tightly that the metal began to bend. The final section of the data showed current human military capabilities. Submarines lurking in ocean depths, each one carrying enough nuclear weapons to destroy entire continents. Satellites orbiting their planet with targeting systems that could track a single individual from space. Missiles that could cross their entire world in less than an hour. Weapons research programs working on technologies that the Vorthani had never even imagined. "Captain," Sullivan spoke again when the data finished playing. "You've seen what we do to people we share a planet with, Admiral. You have seen what we are willing to sacrifice, what we are willing to endure, what we are willing to become in order to win our wars. Every species thinks they understand violence. Every species thinks they know what war means. We invented new forms of destruction because the old ones were not efficient enough." She leaned forward slightly, and for the first time, there was something hard in her gray eyes. "You have conquered 17 civilizations, Admiral. That is impressive. But those civilizations had never met us. They had never learned what we learned through centuries of killing each other. They had never developed the weapons we developed or the strategies we perfected. You think you are bringing war to Earth, but we are war. We have been practicing for this moment since before your empire existed." The communication channel remained open, but Captain Sullivan said nothing more. She simply sat there, waiting. While 10,000 Vorthani warships floated in space with their crews too stunned to speak, Admiral Crix finally found his voice. "This changes nothing. We still outnumber you. We still have superior technology." Captain Sullivan smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. "Then by all means, Admiral, continue your advance. We have prepared a demonstration of what your superior numbers and technology will face. I suggest you watch carefully." She ended the transmission, and her tiny ship began moving away from the fleet at a leisurely pace. Crix looked at his officers. None of them would meet his eyes. High Sovereign Zelthor received the reports from Admiral Crix with growing unease. The historical data that the humans had transmitted was now being analyzed by every intelligence officer in the fleet, and the conclusions were disturbing. These soft creatures with their fragile bodies had spent their entire existence finding new and terrible ways to destroy each other. They had turned warfare into an art form and mass destruction into a science. But Zelthor had not conquered 17 star systems by retreating at the first sign of difficulty. He had built his empire through boldness and decisive action. The Vorthani fleet was still the mightiest force in the known galaxy, and he would not turn back because of some historical records and threatening words. He sent new orders to Admiral Crix. "Continue the advance." The Vorthani Armada pushed deeper into the Sol system. Passing Mars and approaching the orbit of Earth, sensors showed the human homeworld growing larger on every display, a blue and green sphere wrapped in white clouds. From this distance, it looked peaceful and beautiful. Then the humans revealed what they had been hiding. It started in the asteroid belt. Sections of rock that had appeared completely natural suddenly moved. revealing massive weapon platforms that had been disguised as ordinary asteroids. Hundreds of them powered up simultaneously, their energy signatures lighting up Vorthani sensors like exploding stars. On Luna, the Earth's moon, hangar doors opened across the gray surface. Human warships emerged by the dozens, then by the hundreds. They were smaller than Vorthani vessels, but moved with incredible speed and coordination, forming attack patterns that no Vorsani officer had ever seen before. Hidden bases on Mars, on the moons of Jupiter, on platforms orbiting Venus and Mercury, all revealed themselves at the same moment. What had appeared to be a minor spacefaring civilization with a handful of ships was suddenly showing. Military infrastructure throughout the entire star system. Admiral Crix stared at his tactical display, with his mouth hanging open. Where did all of this come from? Our scouts reported minimal human presence outside their homeworld. Senior Analyst Vex worked frantically at her console. They hid it, Admiral. They deliberately showed us what they wanted us to see. These installations have been here for years, perhaps decades, and we never detected them. The communication system crackled, and a new human face appeared on the display. This one belonged to a man with a shaved head and the hard eyes of a career soldier. His uniform carried many symbols that clearly indicated high rank. "This is General Kevin Brooks of United Earth Command," the man announced. "Your fleet has entered restricted space. You have exactly one chance to turn around and leave. Consider your next action very carefully." Crix recovered his composure and glared at the screen. "You are still outnumbered, human. For every ship you reveal, we have 10. Your hidden bases do not change the mathematics of this engagement." General Brooks showed no reaction to the threat. "Admiral, you seem like a practical being. Let me show you something practical." The display changed to show a section of the asteroid belt far from the fleet. Floating there was a chunk of rock approximately the size of a small moon, spinning slowly in the eternal darkness of space. "That asteroid is designated Target Alpha," General Brooks explained. "It is roughly similar in size to the larger vessels in your fleet. Watch carefully." For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a beam of pure white light lanced across space from somewhere near Earth. It moved so fast that Vorthani's sensors barely registered it. Before it struck the asteroid, the rock did not explode. It did not crack or shatter. It simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, a solid mass of stone and metal that had drifted through space for billions of years. The next moment, there was nothing but expanding gas and scattered particles. The bridge of the crushing tide fell absolutely silent. General Brooks appeared on the screen again. "That was our mining laser, Admiral. We use it to break apart asteroids for resource extraction. It is a civilian tool, not a military weapon." He paused to let that information sink in. The actual weapons are considerably larger. Admiral Crix felt his scales going pale. Around him, officers were backing away from their consoles, as if the displays themselves might reach out and kill them. The mood on the bridge had shifted from confidence to something very close to terror. "How?" Crix managed to ask. "Your civilization is barely a few centuries old. How do you possess such technology?" The general's response was simple. "We have been killing each other for a very long time, Admiral. We got efficient at it. Every generation found new ways to destroy, new weapons to build, new strategies to employ. Your empire has spent 10,000 years conquering peaceful species who had never known war. We have spent our entire existence at war with ourselves. This is what that experience produces." More data flooded the Vorthani sensors. The human fleet was now fully visible, and it was far larger than any estimate had suggested. Battleships the size of Vorthani cruisers, carriers launching swarms of smaller attack craft, submarines of space that could disappear from sensors completely. And behind them all, the massive weapon platforms continued to charge, their energy readings climbing higher with each passing moment. General Brooks continued speaking in his calm, matter-of-fact voice. "Right now, Admiral, your fleet is within range of 47 primary weapon platforms and over 300 secondary batteries. Each platform can fire approximately every 6 seconds. Your ships, impressive as they are, cannot withstand more than 2 or 3 direct hits. I will let you calculate the expected outcome." Crix did the calculation. It took him less than 3 seconds to realize that his entire fleet could be destroyed in under a minute. "This is a bluff," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "You would not actually attack us, would we not?" General Brooks raised an eyebrow. "Admiral, we dropped nuclear weapons on our own cities to end a war faster. We created weapons capable of ending all life on our planet and then pointed them at each other for decades. We have demonstrated repeatedly that there is no line we will not cross, no sacrifice we will not make, no atrocity we will not commit to achieve victory. You declared war on us. You threatened our children and our future. Do you really believe there is anything we would not do to stop you?" On the flagship Eternal Dominion, High Sovereign Zelthor watched the same tactical data that Crix was seeing. The ancient emperor sat alone in his command chamber, surrounded by displays showing the true scope of human military power. He had made a terrible mistake. He understood that now. He had looked at humanity and seen soft bodies and primitive technology. He had not seen the fire that burned inside them, the endless capacity for violence that had shaped their entire species. The Vorsani were conquerors, but they conquered to build an empire. They destroyed when necessary, but preferred to absorb and control. Humans were different. They did not conquer for resources or territory. They fought because something inside them compelled them to fight. An instinct as deep and ancient as the stars themselves. And now 10,000 Vorsani warships were floating in range of their weapons. Waiting to be erased from existence, Zeltar reached for his communication controls and prepared to speak the words he had never spoken in 300 years of rule. He was about to surrender. The surrender of the Vorsani Empire was not a quick process. High Sovereign Zelthor transmitted his initial request for peace talks, but his own officers were divided on how to proceed. Some wanted to fight despite the overwhelming evidence that they would lose. Others wanted to flee back to Vorthani space and pretend the invasion had never happened. A few simply abandoned their posts and locked themselves in their quarters. Too shocked to function, Admiral Crix managed to restore order through sheer force of personality, threatening to personally execute anyone who disobeyed his commands. Within hours, the Vorthani fleet had powered down its weapons and was holding position under the watchful eyes of human targeting systems. Ambassador John Carter arrived on the Eternal Dominion 3 days later. He wore the same simple dark suit he had worn during the declaration of war, and he carried the same leather briefcase. The newspaper was tucked under his arm, slightly more worn than before, but still readable. High Sovereign Zelthor received him in a small private chamber, rather than the grand throne room. The Emperor looked older than he had during their first meeting, his scales dull and his eyes tired. He sat in a simple chair, rather than a throne of bones, and he did not rise when the human entered. "Ambassador Carter," Zelthor said quietly, "you have returned." John pulled up a chair and sat across from the ancient emperor. I understand you wanted to discuss terms. Zelthor repeated the word as if it tasted bitter. "I have spent 300 years dictating terms to others. I never imagined I would be on the receiving end." John nodded sympathetically. History is funny that way. The powerful rarely consider what happens when they meet something more powerful. In your defense, you had no way of knowing what we were. The galaxy is a big place, and information travels slowly. Zelthor studied the human with his ancient yellow eyes. "You knew, though. From the very beginning, you knew how this would end. That is why you were not afraid. That is why you sat in my throne room reading your newspaper while I declared war on your species." "The crossword puzzle is finished, by the way," John said. "In case you were wondering, despite everything, Zelthar felt something that might have been amusement trying to surface. He pushed it down. What do you want, Ambassador? What are your terms for peace? John opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder of documents. The United Nations has prepared a formal treaty. The terms are relatively simple, all things considered. First, the Vorthani Empire will formally apologize for the declaration of war. This apology will be broadcast across all 17 of your star systems. Zelthar's claws tightened on the arms of his chair, but he said nothing. Second John continued. The Empire will pay reparations to Earth. The exact amount is still being negotiated, but it will primarily consist of technology sharing and resource extraction rights in uninhabited systems. Nothing that will cripple your economy, but enough to make clear that actions have consequences. And third, John looked directly at the Emperor. Third, you will release any species currently held in bondage within your empire. Slavery is not acceptable to humanity, and we will not sign a peace treaty with a nation that practices it. Zelthar was quiet for a long moment. You ask me to dismantle the foundations of my empire? Our economy depends on conquered labor. Our military is built on the backs of subjugated species. What you propose would cause chaos throughout our territories. John agreed calmly. It would. You would need to rebuild your society on different principles. That will be difficult and painful. But consider the alternative. High Sovereign, you have seen what our weapons can do. Imagine those weapons turned against your homeworld, your colonies, your people. The threat was delivered in the most polite possible tone, but it was unmistakably a threat. We do not want to destroy you, John added. Humanity has had enough of destruction. We would much rather have trading partners and allies than enemies. But we will not tolerate slavery, and we will not accept anything less than genuine change. Zelthar sat in silence for several minutes. John waited patiently, making no move to rush him. Finally, the ancient emperor spoke. I have ruled for 300 years. I have built the largest empire in the known galaxy. I have been called the Unyielding because I never bent before any force. He paused and looked at the human sitting across from him. But I am not a fool, Ambassador. I know when I have lost. Your terms are harsh, but not unreasonable. I will sign your treaty. John smiled, the first genuine smile he had shown since arriving on the Vorthani ship. A wise decision. High Sovereign. I think you will find that humanity makes a better friend than enemy. The treaty was signed within the week. True to the human demand, High Sovereign Zelthar broadcast a formal apology to every system in his empire. The words clearly cost him dearly, but he spoke them nonetheless. Across 17 star systems, billions of beings watched their invincible emperor admit defeat to a species most of them had never heard of. The release of enslaved species took longer. Nearly a year of complex negotiations and logistical arrangements, but humanity monitored the process carefully, and gradually, the Vorthani Empire transformed from a conquering power into something more closely resembling a federation of worlds. Ambassador. John Carter returned to Earth as a hero. There were parades planned in his honor, ceremonies organized by grateful governments, medals waiting to be pinned on his chest. He attended exactly one event, a small reception at the United Nations headquarters, and then quietly retired to his home in a small town far from any major city. When reporters tracked him down and asked how he felt about defeating an intergalactic empire, he shrugged and said he was just glad to have time to catch up on his reading. Years later, a young Vorthani historian named Vex compiled all the records of the failed invasion into a comprehensive account. She had been the senior analyst on Admiral Crix's ship, one of the first to truly understand what the historical data had meant. Now she dedicated herself to making sure future generations understood the lesson. She titled her work, The Newspaper Incident, and it became required reading throughout what remained of the Vorthani Empire. The final chapter contained a warning that was eventually translated into 100 languages and shared among every spacefaring civilization in the galaxy. Never threaten humanity. They are not brave because they do not know fear. They are brave because they have already faced the worst enemy imaginable, which was themselves. They spent thousands of years fighting that enemy, and they won. There is nothing in the universe more dangerous than a species that has learned to survive its own nature. And somewhere on a small blue planet orbiting an average yellow star, an old man sat on his porch reading a newspaper, completely unaware that he had become a legend. He was just happy that the crossword was particularly good that day.